Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we unpack complex topics by sifting through stacks of information, getting right to the core of what you need to know.
Yep.
Today, we're taking on a subject that is as contentious as it is deeply held for many, the Chabad-Lubavitch movement.
And we should be clear up front, you've provided us with a series of documents, mostly from a website called Yehudim Neged Chabad, which translates to Jews Against Chabad.
Right.
And these sources, well, they present an exceptionally critical and controversial perspective. We're talking extremely serious, often shocking allegations against the movement.
Exactly. So our mission in this deep dive is to extract the core claims and alleged facts presented in these specific documents. We're talking about the raw truth as framed by these sources, allowing for an unfiltered look at the serious allegations they contain.
Yeah, it's really crucial. We keep emphasizing that. We are reporting on the content of these sources directly as they appear in the text we were given. We're not endorsing any particular viewpoint here.
Not at all. Our goal is simply to lay out what these specific documents claim is at the heart of the controversies surrounding Chabad-Lubavitch, giving you, the listener, a detailed look into this very intense perspective.
That's right. And from the outset, these documents repeatedly label Chabad-Lubavitch as a religious cult and a criminal organization. They flat out assert that its ideology is not Jewish.
And they use this string of terms, right?
Yeah.
Very categorical.
It's stark. Chabad-Lubavitch, cult mafia, crime, fraud, abuse, drugs, fake. Just laid out like that.
And they really double down. Each section of these documents ends with these, exceptionally strong all-cap statements like, Chabad is bad for the Jews. Just say no to Chabad-Lub.
And to underscore their point, they even offer this kind of contest.
It's a $100,000 prize thing.
Exactly. A $100,000 prize will be paid to anyone who can find even one respectable Israeli rabbi who says that Chabad is Jewish. And then they add, you will never find any such rabbi, but try to find it anyway as an educational exercise if you still think that Chabad is Jewish.
Wow, okay. So that definitely sets a very aggressive, very critical tone right from the start.
No question. So let's unpack this. Let's dive into the specific allegations these documents make, starting with their definition of Chabad as a cult and a non-Jewish entity.
Okay, the cult allegation first. How do the sources define that?
Well, as defined by these sources, it focuses heavily on what they call psychological manipulation. Specifically, things like coercive persuasion and mind control techniques that they allege are used to suppress critical thinking among members.
Coercive persuasion, that's a pretty loaded term. How do they break that down? What steps do they allege are involved?
Okay, so the sources break down these alleged techniques into several distinct steps. First, they claim individuals are put into physically or emotionally distressing situations.
Okay. Step one, stress.
Step two, they say complex problems are then reduced to simple, repeatedly emphasized explanations by the group. Sort of easy answers for hard questions. Then, step three, and this is a dynamic often associated with cults in general, the sources allege members receive unconditional love, acceptance, and attention from a charismatic leader.
The love bombing phase, essentially.
You could call it that, yeah. Then, step four, they're provided with a new identity based on the group, which gives them that sense of belonging, of purpose.
Right.
And finally, step five, and maybe the most critical in these kinds of allegations, members are said to be subjected to entrapment.
Entrapment, meaning?
Meaning, according to the sources, systematic isolation from friends, relatives, and the mainstream culture, plus severely controlled access to information. The idea being this control prevents independent thought, prevents outside influence.
So what are the alleged outcomes of this process, this abuse, as the sources call it?
Well, the source material points to things like personality changes, a significant loss of individual identity, and this pervasive paranoia, a sort of we're being persecuted mentality, where the group sees itself as under constant threat from outsiders.
And to really hammer this home, the documents make that comparison to Jonestown, don't they?
They do. A chilling and direct parallel. The source references Jonestown directly, points out how its initial messages of harmony and justice, from Jim Jones,
Right.
eventually devolved into leaked stories of beatings, kidnapping, sexual abuse. And we know how that ended. Mass suicide. Over 900 people.
It's a terrifying comparison.
Absolutely. And the comparison, as the source draws it, is meant as a stark warning. A warning against what it sees as blind faith in charismatic leaders, and the potential for similar, maybe less extreme, but still profoundly detrimental outcomes if critical thinking is shut down and control is exerted like that.
Okay, so that's the cult angle. Now, shifting gears slightly, but still related, the theological side. These documents cite numerous important rabbis who allegedly consider Chabad a completely different religion from Judaism. That's quite a claim.
It is, and it's not presented as just a casual dismissal. It's framed as this deep-rooted theological separation, a profound departure from what they consider mainstream Jewish beliefs.
So who are they citing specifically?
Well, one of the most prominent figures cited is Rabbi Elazar Shach. He was, for decades, a huge leader in the non-Hasidic, the Litvish, ultra-Orthodox world, head of the Ponevez Yeshiva in Israel, a major figure.
Okay, and what did he allegedly say?
The sources claim Rabbi Shach compared Chabad and its late Rebbe, Menachem Mendel Schneerson, to Sabbatai Zevi.
Wow, Sabbatai Zevi.
Yeah.
The 17th century false messiah. That's about as serious an accusation as you can make in this context.
Exactly. Calling Schneerson insane, an infidel, a false messiah, these are incredibly grave terms in Jewish discourse. And maybe most strikingly, the sources allege that when Rabbi Shach was asked which religion was theologically closest to Judaism, he reportedly responded, Chabad.
Given his stature, that's an incredibly provocative statement, if accurate. Did he suggest any action?
According to these documents, yes. They indicate Rabbi Shach not only advocated a complete boycott of Chabad, its institutions and projects, but also stated that Chabad followers are idol worshippers.
Idol worshippers.
Okay.
For listeners who might not know, idolatry is considered one of the absolute worst sins in Judaism.
Absolutely. Foundational prohibition. So that level of condemnation, as described in these documents, really highlights the perceived theological chasm.
Are there other rabbinic figures mentioned?
Yes, several. Rabbi Ahern Feldman, who's the dean of Ner Israel Rabbinical College in Baltimore, a very respected voice in American Orthodoxy, he's cited as stating that Messianists are ignorant of Torah and their rulings cannot be relied upon.
Okay. Does he distinguish between different types of followers?
He does, according to the source. He apparently categorizes them into Mishikists, who believe the Rebbe is the Messiah, and Elikists, who believe the Rebbe is actually God.
The Elikists, believing the Rebbe is God.
That's the claim. And according to the source, Rabbi Feldman explicitly rules it's forbidden to associate with Elikists under any circumstances due to their heresy, and they cannot be counted for a minyan.
Wow. Not counted for a minyan. That effectively excludes them from communal prayer, doesn't it?
It does. It's a fundamental exclusion in traditional Jewish practice. It marks them, according to this ruling as presented, as outside the bounds of normative Judaism. And even for the Mishitists, while not called strict heretics, Rabbi Feldman reportedly discourages association and supporting their beliefs.
So it's a deep divide, even within the movement itself, as seen by these critics.
According to these sources, yes. And they present this concern as pretty widespread, extending beyond just individual rabbis. They cite the Rabbinical Council of America, the RCA.
The largest Orthodox rabbinic body in the world, right?
That's how it's described. And they reportedly issued a significant resolution back in 1996, specifically condemning Lubavitch false messianism.
What did the resolution say?
It unequivocally states, and this is a quote from the source referencing the resolution, "There is not and has never been a place in Judaism for the belief that the Messiah will begin his mission only to experience death, burial, and resurrection before completing it."
Okay, so that's a direct repudiation of the idea of a deceased and returning Messiah. Coming from the RCA, that carries weight.
It certainly suggests a major institutional concern, as presented. And it's not just American groups. The chief rabbinate of Israel in 2000 also reportedly warned against turning simple faith in the coming of the Messiah into propaganda whose end cannot be foreseen.
So concerns across different Orthodox bodies. What about other streams, like Sephardi rabbis?
Yes, the sources bring in strong condemnations from Sephardi figures too. Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, the late, massively influential spiritual leader of Israel's Shas party.
A huge authority in Sephardi law.
Universally revered, yes. He is reportedly quoted stating that Chabad has nothing to do with Sephardi Jews and aligning with Rav Shach's view that it's a different religion.
Okay.
The sources even claim the Gaon of Vilna, now he's an 18th century figure, a giant of Lithuanian Jewish thought, held the extreme view that marrying anybody from Chabad was like marrying a non-Jew.
Like marrying a non-Jew. That's shocking. That implies a complete break.
It's the gravest possible theological disapproval, yeah. Inaccurate. And another prominent Sephardi Kabbalist, Rabbi Kaduri, allegedly called Schneerson just a crazy old man after visiting him.
So the criticism, according to these sources, comes from Litvish, American Orthodox, Israeli Chief Rabbinate, Sephardi authorities. What about other Hasidic groups?
Even Hasidic rabbis from other dynasties are quoted in these sources claiming Chabad is not part of Hasidic Judaism or even Orthodox Judaism.
And the reason given?
The fundamental reason cited is their belief that their Rabbi, who died in 1994, will literally return as the Messiah. That's the core issue highlighted.
So practically speaking, what does all this condemnation mean for an ordinary Jew interacting with Chabad according to these sources?
Well, the practical implications, as stated in these documents, are presented as severe. They claim that things like kosher certification, Jewish divorces, a get, or conversions performed by Chabad rabbis are not recognized as valid by most Orthodox Jews.
That's huge. That affects people's fundamental Jewish status and practice.
Exactly. It's a profound rejection of Chabad's religious authority by various mainstream Jewish institutions, according to this source material. It would have significant real-world consequences for individuals relying on Chabad for these things.
Okay, so the sources paint Chabad as a cult, as non-Jewish, facing widespread rabbinic condemnation.
Yeah.
Now let's drill down into the theological core of why, according to them, the messianic beliefs.
Right. Segment 2. This is where the claims get particularly controversial, focusing on identity and alleged idolatry.
Idolatry again. How do they connect the messianism to idolatry?
The source cites Alan Nadler's polemic, which references Rabbi David Berger's argument. And Berger's argument, as presented, is that Lubavitch messianism is almost indistinguishable from Christianity, and he defines it explicitly as idolatry.
Indistinguishable from Christianity.
Yeah.
How so?
It highlights the historic Jewish-Christian theological dispute, the 2,000-year argument, really over the idea of a Messiah who dies and is then reincarnated or deified, becomes a god.
Which traditional Judaism rejects.
Powerfully rejects, as the source emphasizes, often historically with their very lives. Traditional Judaism insists on a Messiah who is human, comes physically, and completes the mission without dying or becoming divine.
Okay, so how do the sources claim this applies to Chabad and Rebbe Schneerson? This is where it gets really sensitive, isn't it?
Extremely sensitive, and frankly, quite astonishing, as portrayed in these documents. The claims center on the deceased Rebbe, Menachem Mendel Schneerson, being treated not just as Messiah, but even as God.
And they have a proof text for this.
The absolute proof text, as they frame it, is the Lubavitcher liturgy. Long live our master, teacher, and Rebbe, King Moshiach, forever and ever, commonly known as the Yehi.
Yehi, okay. And is this just something a few people say?
Not according to these sources. They claim this Yehi slogan is now a standard part of the Lubavitcher liturgy. Deeply integrated.
How integrated?
Recited in synagogues and yeshivas, before putting on tefillin, during grace after meals, even, they claim, at the very end of the Nila service on Yom Kippur.
Yom Kippur,
Yeah.
the holiest day of the year.
That's what the sources allege. This deep integration, they suggest, shows how central and widespread this belief is.
And it goes beyond just reciting the slogan.
Oh, yes. The sources allege a posthumous deification of the Rebbe. They claim Chabad spokesmen and publications refer to him not just as the living Melech HaMoshiach, the living King Messiah, but also as the honored Rabbi, the Holy One, blessed be he.
The Holy One, blessed be he, is usually a term reserved for God.
Exactly. And they claim his Yahrzeit, the anniversary of his passing, is treated as the day of his apotheosis, his elevation to divine status.
Wow. And even more direct claims.
Perhaps the most controversial? The sources state Schneerson is referred to as the essence and being of God enclothed in a body.
The essence of God in a body.
Yeah, and they allege Lubavitcher Chassidim pray directly to the Rebbe's portrait, which they say hangs on the eastern walls of their synagogues, the direction of prayer in blatant violation of Jewish law.
Praying to a portrait.
And they cite a Chabad journal by Moshiach, which allegedly took the popular Sabbath hymn Ein Keloheinu, There is none like our God, and transposed it from God to Schneerson. The quote provided is, so who is Eloheinu, our God? The Rebbe, Melech HaMoshiach, that's who.
That's incredibly direct claim from the source material, substituting the Rebbe for God in a traditional prayer.
It's astonishing, yes. And Rabbi David Berger's analysis, as cited, meticulously defines this belief as idolatry. He reportedly bemoans the indifference of the Orthodox establishment to what he sees as the death of traditional Jewish messianic faith. The source calls it a chilling story of descent into madness of false messianism and idolatrous worship.
So how did this develop? Was it sudden, or did it build over time, according to these documents?
According to Melik Jaff's A Brief History of Chabad-Lubavitch Messianism, as cited in the sources, it was a gradual intensification. It traces the belief that the seventh Lubavitcher, Rebbe Schneerson, would fulfill the divine purpose and bring about redemption, acting as Moshiach.
So there were precursors, earlier hints.
Definitely. The sources point to the 5th, 6th, and 7th Rebbes, all allegedly making statements about Moshiach arriving imminently in their lifetimes. Each generation seemed to heighten the expectation. The 5th Rebbe in 1908 reportedly said, "We are now in the last generation, the generation of Moshiach, without any doubt." The 6th Rebbe in 1927, "It will be in my lifetime," and again in 1939, "Moshiach is already here." Then the 7th Rebbe, Schneerson, in 1952, "Moshiach is about to arrive. In his lifetime, Moshiach will come." So it builds.
Okay, so a foundation was laid. Were there specific turning points for Schneerson's messianism becoming more public?
The documents identify several. In 1970, there was the Moshiach Sefer Torah ceremony dedicating a Torah scroll specifically for Moshiach. The sources see this as making Moshiach a tangible reality within the community.
Good.
Later, the death of the Rebbetzin, the Rebbe's wife, in 1988. This allegedly increased urgency in the Rebbe's lectures towards bringing Moshiach, as if her passing somehow underscored the need for immediate redemption.
But the biggest shift came later.
The most significant turning point, according to these sources, was shortly after Passover in 1991. The Rebbe gave this speech, described as very uncharacteristic, urging his followers, "Do all that you can to bring Moshiach," saying something like, "What else can I do? I give this over to you."
And how was this speech perceived?
It's characterized as delivered with despair and panic, a real shift in his tone. And after that, the sources claim every single lecture he gave until his stroke in 1992 was devoted to the topic of Moshiach, an all-consuming focus.
So the belief itself wasn't new, but the public focus intensified dramatically.
Exactly. The sources say the belief that the Rebbe Moshiach was always kind of present among Chassidim, maybe under the surface. There was a song calling him King Moshiach. Initially, he reportedly didn't allow it sung in his presence, but later they say he tolerated it and even indicated encouragement, especially as the fervor grew, and particularly after his stroke in 92.
So the stroke in 1992 was another major catalyst.
Huge, according to these accounts. After the stroke, things visibly escalated. It allegedly became customary to recite Yechi 3 times after prayers. And then this really symbolic moment described for Rosh Hashanah in 92.
What happened?
The Rebbe was brought to a window overlooking the main sanctuary at 770 Eastern Parkway, the Chabad headquarters. The Chassidim sang the full Yechi, and the sources claim the Rebbe appeared to encourage the singing, nodding his head, raising his hand.
Which was interpreted how?
As an acknowledgement of acceptance, according to the sources. It apparently led many Chassidim to openly refer to the Rebbe as Moshiach. Things really snowballed.
To the point
where a full-blown coronation ceremony for the Rebbe as Moshiach was announced for satellite broadcast, reportedly with his consent, though the organizer, Rabbi Butman, later walked back the term coronation.
Interesting. So the internal debate wasn't if he was Moshiach, but whether to broadcast it.
That's how the sources frame the main divide then, whether his messiahship should be prematurely exposed to hasten the revelation or kept more private. A strategic debate, not a theological one, according to this view.
Then came June 12, 1994. The Rebbe passed away. How did that affect these beliefs, according to the sources?
Well, the sources claim that immediately on the morning of the Rebbe's passing, no one was a Messiachist. Just shock disbelief.
Well, that changed quickly.
Very quickly, they allege, under immense group influence. A page started circulating with the Rebbe's talks from after the previous Rebbe's passing talks that apparently implied resurrection, and interpreting them that way became, quote, the only way to read it, under this group pressure.
So how did this belief solidify so fast, despite his death? Especially if some denied it publicly.
That's a key point the sources make. They describe the anti-Meshiatist faction, those who publicly denied the Rebbe was still Moshiach after his death, as retroactively claiming he never allowed the King Moshiach title, and engaging in self-deception, denying it publicly while allegedly accepting it privately.
Any examples of that?
They point to Rabbi Yoel Kahn, a major Chabad scholar. He'd apparently written an article proving the Rebbe was Moshiach before his death, yet the sources claim became an ardent anti-Meshiachist after the Rebbe died, which raises questions for the source authors about consistency.
And what about those who said he was no longer a candidate because he died?
That position, held by someone named Yecheskel Sofer, is described by the sources as unacceptable heresy by the American antis, often called kafira, heresy.
So despite these nuances and alleged denials, who did publicly state he was Moshiach according to the documents?
Key leaders. People like Rabbi Yehuda Krinsky, chairman of Merkos Lenyonite Chinook, the main Lubavitch organization, and Rabbi Avraham Shumtov, described as the second most powerful person in Chabad. Both are cited as publicly stating the Rebbe is Moshiach.
Okay. And did different factions emerge even within the messianic camp?
Yes, the sources outline several, showing different intensities. They mention Meir Baranes, who displayed a photo of the Rebbe captioned God. They talk about Boronuniks and Elokistim, those who refer to the Rebbe as God, either attributing divine character to the physical Rebbe or vice versa. And the Tzotim, the contingent from Sefed, Israel, known for aggressively using Yechi, insisting the Rebbe is literally alive and occupying 770.
So lots of variations, but what about the average Chabad follower? What do the sources claim most believe?
The sources claim that Lubavitchers uniformly believe that the Rebbe will return as Moshiach, with only a negligible handful not accepting it.
Uniformly, that's a strong claim. How do they distinguish Meshikists versus anti-Meshikists then?
They argue the key distinction is simply whether one answers Yechi after prayers, implying it's just a superficial difference in public practice, not fundamental belief. The documents explicitly state neutral is just another word for Meshikist.
So painting a picture of near-universal belief within the movement that the Rebbe will return as Messiah.
That's the picture these specific sources paint, yes. Very unified on that core belief.
Okay. So we've covered the cult allegations, the theological condemnations, the intricacies of the messianic beliefs. But the sources then pivot pretty dramatically, don't they?
They do, to an entirely different and frankly equally disturbing set of claims, alleging that Chabad operates not just as a religious group, but as a sophisticated criminal organization involved in widespread abuse.
Right. Segment 3, allegations of criminality and abuse. This is where the sources use terms like mafia.
Exactly. They flatly state Chabad is a criminal organization, an organized crime mafia. They claim Chabad runs a large network of schools and synagogues that, according to these documents, serve as fronts for their criminal activity.
Fronts for crime. What kind of crime are they alleging?
Extensive white-collar crime. Things like financial fraud, tax evasion, and money laundering in a very organized manner. They also list racketeering activities. Kidnapping, robbery, bribery, extortion, counterfeiting, theft, fraud, obstruction of justice, embezzlement, bankruptcy fraud, securities fraud, even illegal alien assistance.
That's quite a list.
And the source then states emphatically with 3 exclamation points. Chabad is engaged in all of the illegal activities mentioned above.
Wow. Okay. What's the alleged scale of this financial wrongdoing?
The sources claim Chabad gets hundreds of millions, maybe even billions of dollars annually through illegally and fraudulently obtained government grants from the U.S., Australia, Russia, Ukraine, plus private donations. And this money allegedly ends up in offshore bank accounts.
Do they give specific examples?
They do. They highlight a case in Adelaide, Australia. Rabbi Yossi Engel and his wife allegedly defrauded the Australian government for about $5 million. Supposedly using fake Hebrew classes and dummy enrollments, enrolling kids who didn't know they were enrolled. The sources claim the exposure of this alleged fraud led to a surge in anti-Semitism locally.
Okay.
Any other cases? They also detail Israeli arrests. Top 5 Chabad rabbis in Israel reportedly arrested for financial fraud, tax evasion, and money laundering. This allegedly involved $60 million from donations, fictitious bank accounts, under-the-table payments.
How did the scheme allegedly work?
Allegations included businessmen donating money to Chabad, then getting it back illicitly, allowing them to claim tax breaks for fake donations. And this reportedly involved dozens of Chabad officials.
And then there's the Seattle case they mentioned.
Right, the Seattle money laundering case. They described this one as particularly noteworthy. Rabbi Shalom Ber-Levitin, identified as a regional director and later a board member of Merkos Lenyonite Chinook, the main Chabad outreach arm. He was convicted in 1989 for being part of an international money laundering ring. The sources claim this ring sent millions to Panama, Colombia, London, West Germany, Israel, and was reportedly linked to a cocaine smuggling cartel.
What was his sentence?
A $10,000 fine and 30 days imprisonment. But the sources emphasize that Rabbi Yehuda Krinsky, who they identify as the current head of Chabad, is also the director of Merkos, the organization, sending out emissaries worldwide. And they allege these emissaries set up Chabad houses that are then used for, well, drug dealing, trafficking, and money laundering.
Which brings us to the drug allegations. This is another major claim in these documents.
A huge one. The sources claim it's a widely known fact in Jewish religious circles that Chabad finances its schools and houses primarily with drug profits.
How do they allege this works logistically?
They point to the alleged strategic placement of Chabad houses, often in remote areas known for high volume of illegal drugs activity. They cite Tijuana, Mexico, as an example, oldest Chabad house in Mexico, major drug trafficking city. These houses allegedly provide money laundering services for drug money.
Again, any specific incidents cited?
Yes. In 2010, a resident of Kfar Chabad in Israel was suspected of orchestrating a $1 million cocaine deal, 10.5 kilos from Brazil to Israel. Also in 2010, a Chabad emissary from Safed, arrested in Madrid with 4 kilos of cocaine, supposedly fooled into smuggling it from Costa Rica. The implication is these aren't isolated cases.
In Bolivia, Latin America seems to feature prominently.
It does. They describe a young Chabad couple sent on a holy mission to Rurenabac, Bolivia, a remote place with supposedly no Jews. Their Chabad house was raided by police amid rumors of drug trafficking. The source quotes someone saying, "A lot of Israelis who come here smoke hashish and marijuana there," implying a connection.
And it goes beyond trafficking to actual production.
That's another allegation. The discovery of active production of methamphetamine and a crystal meth lab at the Rubashkin Agri-Processors meat plant in Postville, Iowa, owned by a prominent Chabad family. They also claim large-scale illegal drug manufacturing and distribution operations in Brazil and Argentina.
This is all pretty shocking. How do the sources connect this alleged criminal activity to Chabad's internal culture or beliefs?
This is where it gets particularly startling. They assert Chabad promotes the use of drugs and alcohol as the Rebbe was a known alcoholic.
Seriously, they claim the Rebbe was an alcoholic.
That's the claim. And that the belief, as stated in the source, is that getting drunk with alcohol or high on drugs gets people to a higher spiritual state, implying a theological justification for substance use.
Wow. Any other examples of promoting substance use?
Chabad allegedly objected to proposed Israeli legislation banning drinking for minors. They reportedly promote lots of vodka at Farbrengens, these communal gatherings, although they note some Chabad schools limit it to 3.5 ounces.
Okay. From financial crime and drugs, the sources move to something even more disturbing. Kidnapping, child abduction, human trafficking.
Yeah, these are incredibly serious accusations. They claim it's a known fact among all Jewish rabbis that Chabad has been kidnapping Jewish children for over 60 years.
Known fact. That's a bold statement. Do they give examples?
They mention Yemenite children found studying in Chabad schools in Crown Heights, implying they were taken from their families.
And what's the alleged motive? Why kidnap children?
The alleged brainwashing strategy presented is deeply disturbing. They claim it's a lot easier to brainwash and indoctrinate little children than grown adults.
And they compare this strategy to...
This is where they draw another chilling parallel to methods used by communist Russia and by Nazi Germany and Hamas and Hezbollah, stating explicitly, this is how the worst and most violent and evil communists, Nazis, and terrorists are created. And this is how Chabad creates its most fanatic Chabad followers.
That's an extreme comparison. How do they allege these abductions happen?
Several methods are described. They warn, if you put your children in a Chabad school, you could lose your children forever. They claim school officials might identify families with marital problems, then allegedly tell the wives to divorce, take the kids, move away, even make false accusations against the fathers.
And sometimes the kids are taken from the mothers, too.
In some truly alarming alleged cases, yes. The children are later taken from the mothers for Chabad adoption, suggesting a systemic approach.
What if parents just want to leave a Chabad school?
If parents try to move their children to a non-Chabad school, the sources allege Chabad makes false accusations to Child Protective Services to stop them.
Good grief. So the purpose of Chabad schools and camps, in this view?
Described as brainwashing and indoctrination institutions, designed to create stupid and uneducated zombies who will blindly follow Chabad rabbis into illegal activities or violence. The summer camps are explicitly likened again to those of communists, Nazis, terrorists.
And they issue a safety warning.
A very strong one. Do not ever send your children to a Chabad summer camp or Chabad youth group due to alleged risk of abduction, child abuse, and rape.
And it extends to adult children, too.
Yes. They claim Chabad rabbis actively try to convince grown children to slowly but surely cut their ties to their parents, brothers, and sisters, systematically isolating them from their families.
Just layer upon layer of alleged control. And this leads into the claims of molestation and child abuse within Chabad institutions.
Directly. The sources claim Chabad school's objective is not to provide a safe environment. Child abuse is rampant.
Again, specific incidents mentioned. This is difficult territory.
It is. The sources detail several disturbing alleged incidents. A 15-year-old reportedly molested by a 20-year-old Mafia bocher, a spiritual mentor. A 12.5-year-old by Rabbi David Waxer of Crown Heights, who the sources allege is still molesting teenagers.
Oh my goodness.
An 11-year-old allegedly molested at Camp Gan Israel in Montreal. The alleged abuser later reportedly went on to commit anal rape against boys at Knife Point in California.
Suggesting a pattern of escalation and movement.
That's the implication.
Yeah.
Another account. A 13-year-old molesting 10-plus younger boys in a Chabad cheder near Jerusalem. School admin reportedly notified, but allegedly just warned the molester. No parents notified, no police called. Caught again, expelled, still no police, no parent notification, highlighting an alleged pattern of cover-up.
Any other examples of alleged abuse or lack of accountability?
Yes. In Las Vegas, a Chabad Azan cantor sexually assaulted a woman, pleaded guilty. Chabad Las Vegas then allegedly sued the victim for $175,000 in attorney's fees. And Rabbi Harlig reportedly falsely claimed the victim wasn't Jewish.
Suing the victim, that's extraordinary.
And they mention Rabbi Yaakov Weiss, son-in-law of the businessman Rubashing, accused of sexual abuse of 13-year-old boys in Colony, NY in 2008.
So the overall picture regarding abuse.
The picture painted by these sources is one of severe lack of accountability. Accused molesters often not punished, maybe transferred, even supported. And what's striking is the claim about Dr. Benzion Twersky.
The psychologist who headed a task force on rabbinic sex abuse.
Yes. He allegedly quit due to prosecution in the street and threats, stating he was forced to resign, suggesting, according to the sources, a pervasive environment of intimidation to silence victims and whistleblowers.
This is a lot to take in. Okay, let's move into the final segment based on these sources. Segment 4, social and political controversies. How do they connect Chabad's actions to broader issues?
Well, one claim is that Chabad-Lubavitch actions, especially when their alleged criminal activities get exposed, paradoxically create anti-Semitism in the world, basically arguing their behavior reflects badly on all Jews.
How do they support that claim? What examples do they give?
They point to Chabad's persistent, very public efforts to display large menorahs on public lands. This has led to numerous court cases: Allegheny County, Burlington, Chicago, Cincinnati, Georgia, White Plains.
The church-state separation battles.
Exactly. And these often spark debate and, the sources claim, can cause resentment. They cite the American Jewish Congress back in '88 criticizing this practice for causing tension both within the Jewish community and with non-Jews.
Okay, what else?
There's even a war on Christmas angle mentioned. Rabbi Elazar Bogomilsky reportedly complained about a Christmas tree at SeaTac Airport in 2006, leading to its removal, which caused widespread criticism in the press.
Right, I remember that controversy.
And New York City schools banning nativity scenes but allowing holiday trees and menorahs is also cited, with Bill O'Reilly calling it anti-Christian, which the source implies fuels public resentment.
Okay. Moving from public displays to ideology.
Yeah.
Claims of supremacy.
Yes. The sources state Chabad espouses a belief system holding that people from Chabad are superior to people of other backgrounds, and then extending that. Jews are superior to non-Jews, and even Chabad Jews are superior to other Jews, of a very hierarchical view.
And they link this to Chabad's core texts.
Explicitly. They label the Tanya, Chabad's foundational philosophical text, a racist text.
Racist, that's a strong charge. What do they claim it says?
They claim it states that the souls of the nations of the world, all non-Jews, however, emanate from the other, unclean kalipot evil forces, which contain no good whatever, and that Gentiles are essentially dead, or their bodies are in vain, lacking spiritual vitality compared to Jews.
That's deeply problematic, if accurate. Are there quotes from Schneerson himself?
Yes. The seventh Rebbe is directly quoted in these sources stating, "The body of a Jewish person is of a totally different quality from the body of members of all nations of the world. Two contrary types of soul exist. A non-Jewish soul comes from 3 satanic spheres, while the Jewish soul stems from holiness."
Wow.
The source then asks the listener, rhetorically, in a world where most of the population is not Jewish, do you think it's a smart thing to publish a book that defines all non-Jews as evil, highlighting the potential for division?
And does this alleged supremacist ideology translate into calls for violence, according to the sources.
That's the next escalation in the allegations, yes. Incitement to violence. Chabad emissaries in Israel allegedly want to convert Israel into a Chabad state. They claim these emissaries have called for the death of various Israeli politicians and even the extermination of all Arabs in Israel whom they see as the enemy, including all Arab children, so they do not become terrorists when they grow up.
Extermination of Arab children. That's genocidal language.
It's chilling, yes. And they provide a direct quote attributed to Chabad Rabbi Manis Friedman. The only way to fight a moral war is the Jewish way. Destroy their holy sites, kill men, women, and children, and cattle.
Kill men, women, and children. Just stated plainly.
As presented in the source, yes. A stark justification for extreme violence. Additionally, they cite the King's Torah, Torat Hamelech, a 2010 book written by students of the Tanya, which reportedly stated it's permissible in Jewish law to kill Gentiles in wartime, including babies, because of the future danger they may present.
And this book was linked to?
Allegedly linked to the Itamar massacre, a horrific terror attack in the West Bank, as a form of retaliation, implying an ideological link between the text and violent acts.
Okay, so incitement claims. What about actual alleged religious violence carried out by followers?
The sources claim Chabad followers can become extremely violent with anybody who opposes them. They give examples.
Like the beating of Chenagareri.
Yes, that striking anecdote. The 6th Rebbe's eldest daughter, in her mid-80s, allegedly beaten by an enraged follower on Shabbat. Why? Because she sought her family's share of the 6th Rebbe's estate, which the 7th Rebbe, her brother-in-law, opposed. And her attacker was then allegedly flown to Israel to evade police.
Suggesting institutional cover-up.
That's the implication. Another unsettling incident, Rabbi Rifkin, an elder Chabad rabbi who refused the Rebbe's request to excommunicate an Israeli politician.
What happened to him?
Allegedly, he was spit on in the streets, called a Nazi, had his home covered with graffiti, his windows broken, constant threats. This harassment reportedly led to his death after a stroke, and the sources claim the Rebbe denied his followers' role, which they call an odd contention, since the Rebbe himself had allegedly publicly harassed Rivkin.
So violence against dissenters, what about internal fights?
Lots of examples cited there, too. In the U.S., territorial disputes between emissaries allegedly involving violence, crime, and deceit. Disputes in Prospect Heights, Brooklyn, Woodstock, NY, where one rabbi claimed the other threatened to bury me alive.
That Postville, Iowa situation comes up again.
Yes, focusing on the 2 rabbinical students who committed armed robberies in '91. Philip Stillman shot a clerk, escaped jail. Rabbi Pinchas Lou got 10 years, ordered to pay $1.43 million.
And the striking part?
What the sources emphasize is that Rabbi Lou later became a Chabad emissary at UNC, got ordained while on probation, and was later accused of indecent exposure, raising serious questions about accountability.
And the clash is over 770 Eastern Parkway.
Yes, violent clashes reported in 2004-2006 between factions anti-Messianists versus Messianists, particularly over putting up a plaque saying Schneerson was deceased. Lawyers reportedly warned of serious violence if court rulings were enforced. High stakes.
Other conflicts mentioned.
Satmar Shabbat brawls in the 80s, blamed on Satmars by Chabad. In Israel, allegations of bribing politicians, rabbis, constant friction with other religious groups. Also, the claim Chabad doesn't recognize the state of Israel not singing Hatikvah, not reciting the prayer for the state.
Specific political violence allegations in Israel.
Yes. Shabtai Bloch, Chabad activist, arrested 98 for allegedly planning an attack on Netanyahu. Netanyahu himself attacked by a crowd shouting, "Murderer, your day will come," in Kfar Chabad in 2005. During the Gaza withdrawal, a Chabad adherent found with weapons accused of planning attacks on Arabs.
And calls for violence from prominent figures.
Rabbi Shalom Dov Wolpo reportedly called for the state execution of P.M. Olmert and ministers for giving weapons money to Palestinian terrorists, leading to an investigation. Also, disputes over a mikveh in Elkanah, a power struggle over the Chabad youth organization involving legal action and embezzlement claims, lots of internal and external conflict described.
Okay, finally, we get to perhaps the most sensitive and deeply controversial claims. Chabad's policy and alleged justification during the Holocaust. This is difficult ground.
Extremely difficult. The sources allege the 6th Rebbe, the Rayats, played a unique and sometimes troublesome role.
Oh, so.
They claim that in 1939, just before the invasion of Poland, he guaranteed safety to American students in his yeshiva there, then fled, leaving his students to fend for themselves.
He just left them.
That's the allegation. And after his own rescue by the U.S., reportedly aided by claims he was the Jewish Pope, the sources claim he asked U.S. officials to prioritize rescuing his Berks and Silver, but made no mention of rescuing his yeshiva students or any other Jews, painting a picture of self-interest.
And money issues during the rescue efforts.
Yes, claims of money disputes with Vad Hatzalah, the ultra-Orthodox rescue group. The riots allegedly expected funds raised in their name to go only to his followers, and then purportedly used funds he raised for rescue to support his Brooklyn yeshiva instead.
Diverting rescue funds.
That's the claim, and perhaps most startling, the Sabbath violation controversy. The riots reportedly attacked Vad Hatzalah for raising money on Shabbat to save lives, calling it a desecration of Jewish law, even in life-or-death situations.
He opposed saving lives on Shabbat.
Allegedly, yes. He insisted only a full return to Torah would bring the Messiah to save Jews, and that earthly rescue efforts would actually delay the coming of the Messiah. The sources also claim his letters to FDR mentioned his own rescue, but never asked the president to do anything to help the Jews of Europe.
Just, wow. And then the allegations about the seventh Rebbe, Schneerson, and justifying the Holocaust.
This is perhaps the most shocking allegation in the sources. They claim Schneerson described the Holocaust as God acting like a surgeon amputating a diseased limb, the millions who perished to cleanse the Jewish people of its sins.
A diseased limb, implying the victims were somehow flawed.
That's the deeply controversial implication. And in this view, as presented, Hitler was allegedly seen as a messenger of J, an instrument of divine punishment.
Is there proof offered for this?
The sources claim a document written by the Rebbe himself, in Hebrew, confirms these statements, despite Chabad denials or claims of mistranslation. They cite Chaika Grossman, a ghetto survivor and Knesset member who reportedly quoted Schneerson's statements in 1980 and received a signed reply from the Rebbe allegedly confirming his remarks. The source concludes the King Messiah didn't deny the Holocaust, but justified it.
A profoundly disturbing theological stance, as presented. And this leads to a Nazi conspiracy theory.
Yes, the documents raise this. Chabad allegedly requested Yad Vashem recognize Admiral Canaris, head of Nazi military intelligence, as a righteous Gentile for saving the 6th Rebbe and about 20 relatives in 1940.
Why would a top Nazi save an Orthodox Rebbe?
That's the critical question the source poses. Why would the Nazis want to send anybody to rescue an ultra-Orthodox Jew from the Nazis? Implying some kind of suspicious deal or connection.
And the claim Chabad benefited.
The sources claim Chabad benefited from the Holocaust, enabling it to finance institutions, expand, and that the 7th Rebbe moved to NY thanks to the Holocaust, suggesting the tragedy created opportunities. They even draw a stark comparison between the sick Chabad ideology, evolving like the sick Nazi ideology, and liken followers' actions to the Milgram obedience experiments.
Implying blind adherence to authority, no matter the command.
That's the final chilling comparison they make.
Okay, we have covered an enormous amount of ground today. We've navigated a truly challenging and, frankly, deeply unsettling landscape, meticulously dissecting the intense claims put forth in the source material about the Chabad-Lubavitch movement.
Absolutely. From allegations of, cultic practices and this deeply problematic messianic theology that, as presented, equates a deceased leader with God,
right,
to these really shocking accusations of extensive criminal enterprises, financial fraud, global drug trafficking, child abduction.
And even those deeply controversial claims regarding their alleged policies and justifications during the Holocaust. These documents, it's fair to say, paint a stark and unsettling picture.
Definitely. And we've also highlighted the severe condemnations from numerous mainstream Orthodox and Sephardi rabbis who, as presented in these sources, view Chabad not as a branch of Judaism, but as something separate, even dangerous.
And those condemnations apparently extend to practical things like kosher certificates, divorces, conversions,
right,
illustrating a profound rupture, according to these texts.
Yeah, a fundamental break, as they frame it.
What's really striking here, I think, is the sheer breadth and extremity of the claims. They're levied against a movement that, to many people, outwardly presents itself in a very different, very positive light.
Sure.
So this deep dive, it's really presented a perspective designed to provoke serious questions and challenge conventional understandings of Chabad-Lubavitch, giving you, the listener, an unfiltered look into these specific allegations from these specific sources.
And perhaps that leads to the final thought. Given the extraordinary nature of these claims we've just laid out, from, spiritual idolatry and alleged calls for violence to organized crime and accusations of actually contributing to anti-Semitism, What does it mean for a community when such profound and contradictory narratives about its identity, its practices, its history exist simultaneously out there in the public sphere?
That's a huge question.
Mm-hmm.
And how do individuals, insiders, outsiders, anyone trying to navigate their understanding of a group when they're confronted with such starkly opposing views and these deeply held, even if highly controversial, beliefs reported in sources like these?
Yeah. How do you reconcile such different realities? Something to think about.